What if I told you the greatest weapon in world history was not a sword, not a cannon, not even an army? What if the real force that rewrote the map of the world was something quieter, something that fits on paper, something that looks boring until it takes control? Here is the real question. How did money become more powerful than military strength? And why do empires start falling apart the moment their financial system begins to crack? Because when most people picture power, they imagine marching troops, loud victories, and flags raised after battles. But history often turns in places that do not look dramatic at all. A back room, a trade office, a banker's desk, a signed agreement, a promise to pay later. And that is why the story matters today. Because even now, nations can win battles and still lose the future. And people can work hard and still feel trapped if the system behind their money is weak. Welcome to FrameHistoro, where we break down how power really works behind the scenes, and how the past still shapes what we live with today. Now, let's go back to the moment the world slowly realized something shocking. Money could buy what armies used to take. For most of human history, power looks simple. If you had the strongest army, you were the strongest nation. That is how Rome rose. Not because of perfect accounting, but because its legions were organized, disciplined, and relentless. The old formula was clear: control land, collect taxes, build bigger armies, take more land, repeat. It was harsh, but it worked. Until it didn't. Because armies are powerful, but armies are expensive. You have to feed them, pay them, move them, replace them, and keep them loyal. Military power was like owning the biggest truck in town. It looks unstoppable until you realize you were paying for gas every single day. The larger an empire became, the more it had to spend just to stay in control. And that leads to a question that changed everything. What happens when conquest stops paying for itself? Because once expansion becomes more costly than profitable, military power stops being the answer, and money starts becoming the real strategy. The biggest change was not a new weapon, it was a new idea. Borrow now, win power today, pay later. That sounds normal in modern America. We use loans for homes, cars, college, and business. But in early history, this was a major shift. Credit turned future money into present power. It meant rulers did not need a vault full of gold before acting. They just needed someone who believed they would repay later. And once credit entered the game, it changed war, diplomacy, and empire building. Kings could fund wars through loans. Nations could build navies using debt. And private groups could act like governments. And here is the wild part. Money began to command force, not the other way around. And once that happened, military power became something you could buy, hire, and rent, instead of something you had to build slowly over generations. As the world grew more connected, trade routes became the new battlegrounds. Nations were no longer only fighting for land, they were fighting for pipelines of wealth. Because controlling trade meant controlling spices, metals, textiles, weapons, and food supply. And if you could block someone's trade, you could hurt them without invading. In simple terms, a battlefield attack is like a punch, but economic pressure is like cutting off someone's paycheck. Slower, quieter, but often more damaging. So countries started building ships, ports, and financial systems not just to win fights, but to stay rich enough to keep fighting. And then history introduced one of the most surprising winners in the story: the Dutch Republic. Small land, small population, not overflowing with natural resources. But the Dutch built something that outperformed size. They built a financial engine. In the 1600s, they developed systems that sound boring, but they were unstoppable. Stable money, strong banking, insurance markets, and modern investing structures. And one of their most important inventions was the joint stock company. The idea that many people could invest in one huge project, share the risk, and share the profits. That created a machine for raising money fast, and that money could build ships fast, hire workers fast, and expand reach fast. And the biggest symbol of this new power was the Dutch East India Company. It was not a country, it was a business, yet it had ships, soldiers, and the ability to control ports and trade. A company acting like an empire. That was a turning point, because it proved something the world would never forget. If you control the money system, you can create military strength without having a massive nation behind you. And Britain saw this lesson clearly, and then upgraded it. Britain did not become powerful only by winning wars. Britain became powerful by making wars affordable, because many empires won battles, but went broke doing it. Britain built a system that could raise enormous funds quickly, largely because people trusted Britain to repay. That trust became a weapon. Britain developed deep markets for government bonds, stronger tax collection, and stable financial institutions. So when war came, Britain could keep paying, keep shipping, and keep supplying, even when rivals started running out of money. And here is the key shift. Wars became a math problem. The question was no longer just who has the better general. It became who can pay soldiers next month, who can replace ships faster, who can borrow without breaking trust, who can outlast everyone. Because modern wars kept getting more expensive. Bigger armies, bigger navies, more equipment, more supply lines, and nations that could not finance the long game could not survive it. And that brings us to Napoleon, one of history's greatest military minds. He won major battles, reshaped Europe, and terrified kings across the continent. But Napoleon ran into an enemy that did not fight only on land: Britain's financial strength. Britain did not need to win every land battle. Britain needed to stay stable. It used trade, naval control, and money to fund allies. It could pay others to keep fighting. It could block shipments. It could keep pressure on. And Napoleon tried to break Britain with a system that was not military. It was economic. The continental system, meant to cut off British trade. But it failed. Because black markets grew, trade adapted, and economic networks are harder to crush than armies. Napoleon's empire fell for many reasons. But the deeper issue was simple. It was not financially sustainable. It expanded faster than it could support. And here is a question worth asking. How many people collapse the same way today? Not because they lack talent, but because they are running on a system that cannot support the pressure. History keeps repeating the same pattern. When the cost of maintaining power rises faster than the income feeding it, collapse becomes only a matter of time. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, the world had fully shifted into a new reality. Power was not just land, it was finance, trade, and industry. The strongest nations were the ones that could build systems, stable currency, reliable credit, massive production, and global shipping access. And this is where Britain became more than a military empire. It became a financial empire. London turned into a world center for banking and insurance, and the pound became widely trusted. Britain could influence far beyond its borders. Because it did not always need to invade, it could shape trade rules, lending, and supply lines. In modern terms, it is the difference between owning one store versus owning the payment network every store uses. One gives local power, the other gives influence everywhere. And that reveals the core truth of this story. In the ancient world, military power created wealth. In the modern world, wealth created military power. The order flipped. Money became the engine, military became the output. And once that happened, a nation could have strong soldiers. But if the economy failed, the military could not function for long. Then the 20th century proved it at scale. Wars became fights of industrial output and financial endurance. Countries needed supply chains, factories, fuel, food, transportation, and constant funding. And in both World War I and World War II, military success depended heavily on economic strength, not just courage, not just tactics. The new foundation of power was the system. But here is the danger. Financial power looks invisible until it fails. Military power is loud. You can see it, count it, and measure it. Money power is quiet. It lives in confidence, contracts, and trust. And when it breaks fast. Because modern systems run on belief. Think about your daily life in the United States. Most money is not cash in your pocket. It is numbers on a screen. It is direct deposit. It is bank transfers. It is credit. It is trust that your paycheck will clear, and trust that your card will work. When trust weakens, everything slows down, and history shows this again and again. Empires often collapse not because they lose one big battle, but because their financial foundation cracks. And once that happens, the empire can still look powerful on the outside, but inside, it is unstable. And one of the biggest causes is overextension. The oldest empire killer. Rome faced it, Spain faced it, and many others did too. Overextension is what happens when a nation's responsibilities grow faster than its ability to pay for them. And money does not automatically prevent it. In fact, credit can make it worse. Because debt creates the illusion of endless resources. You can keep expanding until the bill shows up. And when it does, leaders often face bad choices. Raise taxes, cut services, reduce spending, or weaken the currency. And that is when public anger rises, trust drops, and stability cracks. Spain is a perfect example. In the 1500s and 1600s, Spain received massive amounts of silver from the Americas. It sounds like the ultimate advantage, and for a while it was. Spain funded wars, built fleets, and dominated territories, but the wealth created a trap. Instead of building long-term productive strength, Spain became dependent on imported goods. Inflation rose, and war spending exploded. Debt grew, and Spain defaulted multiple times. So Spain teaches a serious lesson. Having money is not the same as building a stable system. You can be rich and still fall apart, because money without structure becomes fuel for failure. And by modern times, the battlefield expanded even more. Nations began targeting each other's economies directly through blockades, restrictions, trade pressure, and economic isolation, because hurting the economy hurts the military. And once the world became deeply connected, controlling the system became more powerful than controlling the land. And now, we reach the heart of the story. The new definition of power is not only strength, it is systems. Systems of banking, systems of trade, systems of production, systems of trust. The nations that built stable systems could project influence over long periods. And the nations that failed to manage their systems could collapse even with a strong army. And this connects directly to modern life, because financial stability creates options, and options create independence, and independence supports freedom. In the same way nations get trapped by bad incentives, too much debt, unstable systems, or short-term decisions, individuals can too. And the turning point is usually quiet. It is one decision: borrowing too much, spending without a plan, ignoring long-term cost, relying on temporary money, assuming tomorrow will always cover today. This entire history is a story about leverage. And leverage is powerful. It can build greatness, and it can destroy it. And if we had to sum up the biggest lesson of all, it would be this: power shifted from muscle to trust. Trust in currency, trust in repayment, trust in stability, trust in institutions. Once the world moved toward credit and global trade, the nations with reliable financial systems gained something stronger than battlefield victories. They gained the ability to shape the world from a distance. But the downside is just as real. When trust breaks, everything becomes fragile, and history does not forgive fragile systems for long. So next time someone says history is just wars and generals, remember this: armies take land, but money builds the system that decides who keeps it. The empires that lasted were not always the ones with the sharpest swords. They were the ones who understood incentives, stability, and long-term sustainability. And before you go, take a moment and ask yourself, what kind of system are you building in your own life right now? One that survives pressure, or one that collapses when costs rise? If you enjoyed this breakdown of how money quietly rewrote world history, subscribe and explore more stories on FrameHistoro. Because the past is not gone. It is still shaping the world in the background. And the more you understand it, the more clearly you can see what is happening now. Thanks for watching.